I am Grand-Laughton. And before you hear this story, before you press that little subscribe button and turn on notifications, because believe me, you'll want to be there when the hammer drops, let me ask you, have you ever been told, straight to your face, that your simple, decent life is a personal insult to your own family? That your presence is actually devaluing the ground you stand on? Because I have. And that, my friends, is where this confession begins. It all started with a crisp white envelope and a signature that looked like a scorpion crawling across a 5-star menu. The notification arrived last Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after my 35th birthday. Not a birthday card. Oh no, Aunt Vivienne doesn't do sentimental unless it involves diamond collateral. It was a formal eviction notice, a certified letter that smelled faintly of expensive lavender and moral superiority. 30 days. 30 days to vacate the only place I'd ever truly called home. A rent-controlled, slightly dingy, 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of what is undeniably one of the most prestigious apartment buildings in Manhattan, the Grand-Laughton. The irony of the name has always been a subtle, dull ache in my chest, a reminder that I was a Laughton, but only just. The paper shook in my hand, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage that tasted like battery acid. 30 days, Cora, so I can upgrade your little nest into an exclusive Airbnb. She can't do this, can she? I muttered, pacing the threadbare rug. The place was small, cozy, filled with the comforting clutter of a life lived by choice, not by excess. Books were stacked everywhere. A tribute to my job as a high school librarian. The worn velvet armchair was my throne. It wasn't the penthouse that Aunt Vivienne occupied, that glittering $4 million crown jewel that took up the entire top floor, but it was mine. My neighbor Gus, a retired jazz musician with a heart full of cheap whiskey and wisdom, leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed, his face a roadmap of bad decisions and good music. She can't, sweetheart, but she will. This is Vivienne we're talking about. The woman once sued a squirrel for damaging her Italian stucco. What did the notice say exactly? I unfolded the document, my voice tight. Due to planned extensive renovations to enhance the property's overall market appeal, the tenancy of Unit 3B must be terminated, I read, then skipped to the real gut punch. The current use is inconsistent with the Grand-Laughton's new luxury brand positioning. Furthermore, Miss Laughton's consistent refusal to engage with the building's upscale community events, coupled with her employment as a mere public librarian, has regrettably had a perceptible negative impact on property valuation metrics. Gus whistled low. A mere public librarian. That's her opening salvo. She called your existence a blight on her real estate portfolio. That woman's ego is bigger than her penthouse. I know it is, I snapped, tossing the paper onto the coffee table. But this isn't about market appeal, Gus. It's about her. I am the last tangible connection to my grandfather's original vision for this building. A safe haven, a stable home. She wants to scrub the place clean of anything that reminds her she's not the sole, undisputed ruler. I'm an inconvenient truth in her narrative of inherited genius. My phone buzzed. It was Vivienne. The timing, as always, was immaculate and calculated. I hesitated. Should I even answer? Answer it, Gus advised, pushing off the doorframe. Give her an audience. Let her think she's winning. You need to hear the enemy's battle plan. I swiped the screen. Hello, Vivienne. My tone was flat, drained of any emotion she could feed on. Cora, good. You received my paperwork. Her voice was a perfect modulated instrument, the kind that could smoothly close a multi-million-dollar deal or dismiss a servant with equal, chilling politeness. Don't sound so dramatic, darling. It's business. This building is underperforming. I'm merely applying the necessary surgical enhancements. Surgical enhancements? You called my job an insult to the property value. A light, dismissive laugh. Oh, did I phrase it like that? Well, sometimes the truth stings, Cora. Honestly, your life is pedestrian, living off rent control, wearing those little twin sets, pushing dusty books. It sets a certain tone, a depressed tone. Tourists pay a premium for aspiration, not for a peek into a quaint, struggling existence. The words hit me, but they didn't break me. They solidified the ice in my veins. Pedestrian. My life, the one I had built with integrity and hard work, was pedestrian to her. So, my life is ruining your bottom line. Is that what you're saying? I fought to keep my breathing even. I'm saying you have 30 days to find a place that is more suitable to your income bracket. I'm being generous. Don't make this difficult. I've already contacted the movers. They'll be there in 3 weeks. She paused, and her tone shifted, a sliver of false pity cracking through the veneer. Look, I know your father, my late brother, was a disappointment, always relying on Grandpa's scraps. Don't repeat his mistakes. Just take the $20,000 settlement and disappear quietly. Keep the family scandal to a minimum. A family scandal? I echoed, the word feeling hollow and immense. You're evicting your own niece, a Laughton, to turn her home into a short-term rental for strangers. That is the scandal, Vivienne. It's not a scandal if no one important knows, she purred. It's called asset management. Now I have a Pilates class. Don't call me again. Have your lawyer contact mine. Goodbye, Cora. The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. A vacuum where my last shred of hope for human decency once lived. I looked at the eviction notice, then at the chipped paint above the fireplace, a familiar spot that had always seemed to hold the building's secrets. $20,000. Enough for a down payment on a shoebox in Queens, maybe. She's gone full queen bitch, hasn't she? Gus observed, walking back into the room. Full queen bitch, I confirmed, my gaze fixed on the old, soot-stained fireplace. She wants me out so badly she can taste it? She wants to erase me? I walked over to the mantel, my hand brushing the familiar roughness of the old brick. This fireplace hadn't been used since Grandpa died. It was sealed. But as I reached for a book, stacked precariously close to the wall, my fingers brushed against something loose. Something metallic. I pressed harder. The book stack wobbled. A small, almost invisible seam in the brickwork, hidden by decades of soot and dust, gave way with a soft grinding sound. It wasn't a chimney. It was a small, recessed niche. I reached into the dark opening, pulling out a tarnished, heavy old biscuit tin. It was cold to the touch. The kind of tin my grandfather, the original developer, the man who built this entire legacy, used to keep his papers in. My heart was doing the mambo in my chest. This wasn't just a box. This was a piece of him, hidden, secreted away. I didn't open it immediately. I knew, with the kind of primal certainty that hits you right before a car crash, that whatever was inside this humble, dusty tin was the antithesis of that crisp, lavender-scented eviction notice. It was the other shoe dropping, the twist of the knife. The key to the kingdom. I lifted the lid. Inside, tucked beneath a layer of old dried-out rubber bands and a couple of expired foreign stamps, was a thick, legal-sized document, brittle and yellowed with age. The heading, written in the ornate, looping script of a 1970s notary, jumped out at me like a venomous snake. Irrevocable Trust Agreement. And right beneath it, in my grandfather's firm, unmistakable handwriting, were the words, the Grand-Laughton building. The world outside, the city noise, the distant siren, Gus's heavy breathing, all faded. The only sound was the frantic thump of my own blood and the rustle of paper older than I was. I skimmed the details, my eyes flying over the legalese, landing on the crucial lines. The trust was created 50 years ago. Its beneficiary, clearly stated, was his grandchild, Cora Laughton. Effective upon her 18th birthday. The terms were simple, elegant, and final. The building's ownership was irrevocably transferred to the trust, the one managing the property until that date, and subsequently entitled only to the top-floor penthouse residency as a leaseholder, was Vivienne Laughton. My aunt, the so-called property queen, the one who just called my existence a mere burden on her assets, was nothing more than a glorified long-term tenant, a manager of assets that had belonged to me legally for the past 17 years. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. She hadn't just been evicting her niece. She had been trying to evict her actual, legal landlord. The 30-day notice wasn't a threat. It was a desperate, panicked move by a pretender whose long-kept secret had just been exposed by an old, dusty biscuit tin. I looked down at the paper, then back at Gus, a slow, predatory smile finally spreading across my face. It was time to stop being the librarian and start being the landlady. The game, Gus, was officially on. Tuyet voi. Chung tasetieptus voi chuong dos. Len join hava hop chung bui bam. Chung nai selasukien kich hoat sung jot inciting incident. Va twist then shot. Voi jodai bad bok la 102 huak hon mo chut. Dui trivan fong don dap. Ngoi thun hat. Confession. Va joy thoai kichtin. Chuang das. Len join hava hop jong bui bam. I didn't say a word for what felt like an eternity. Gus, bless his jazz musician soul, just stood there, watching the color drain from my face, then rush back in a violent crimson wave. I was staring at the name on the deed, the legal description of the property. The seal of the state. The paper was dry, brittle, the ink faint, but the meaning was clear as a flash of lightning. I was the owner. I, Cora Lawton, the mere public librarian who ruined the building's aesthetic, was the legal and undeniable owner of the Grand-Laughton. Aunt Vivienne was a squatter with a good wardrobe. "Cora," Gus finally prompted, his voice a low rumble. "What is that? You look like you just saw God, and he handed you a winning lottery ticket." I slowly folded the Irrevocable Trust agreement, carefully returning it to the biscuit tin. It felt impossibly light, yet it held the weight of decades of deceit. "Worse, Gus," I whispered, my voice rough, almost unrecognizable. "I saw the devil's contract, and it has my name on the redemption clause." I looked him straight in the eyes. "The eviction notice?" "The one Vivienne sent me. It's meaningless. My grandfather established this trust 50 years ago. The Grand-Laughton building, the whole thing, legally transferred to me when I turned 18, 17 years ago. Vivienne has been managing my property, collecting my rent, and living free in the penthouse. For 17 years. Gus dropped his jaw. He didn't just look shocked. He looked like the entire history of his life was being rewritten live. 17 years? That cold-hearted snake, she knew this whole time. She must have, I said, the realization settling like toxic sludge. Grandpa was meticulous. He didn't trust her, not one bit. This trust was his protection mechanism, a fail-safe to keep her from squandering the entire legacy. She was supposed to manage it, yes, but only as a fiduciary. She had a duty to inform me when I came of age. She never did. My hand clenched around the tin. The smooth, cool metal was the only thing grounding me. She's been fraudulently acting as the owner, using my building's income to fund her endless parade of high society nonsense. The yachts, the charity balls, the European spas, all with my money. "So what now, sweetheart?" Gus asked, moving closer, his voice low and serious. "Do you confront her? Do you march up to the penthouse and show her the paper?" I shook my head, the librarian's logic kicking in, cold and precise. "No, that's what she expects, a burst of emotional amateur rage. She'd deny it, spin it, burn the evidence. Vivienne plays chess. I'm going to play legal thermonuclear war." The next morning, I was sitting across from a lawyer named Mr. Sterling. Not a fancy midtown corporate lawyer, but a sharp, quiet man in a modest office downtown. Someone who specialized in complex trust and estate litigation, a bulldog who understood the difference between law and theatrics. I laid the eviction notice and the brittle trust agreement on his mahogany desk. Mr. Sterling, a man whose expression usually registered only in the negative numbers, leaned back, adjusted his glasses, and spent a silent, excruciating 10 minutes reading the documents. His eyes tracked the old-fashioned legal script, then darted to the eviction notice, then back to the trust. When he finally looked up, his face was a portrait of grim satisfaction. "Miss Lawton," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "This is a masterpiece of estate planning, airtight, irrevocable, as the name suggests. Your grandfather was not only a brilliant developer, he was a brilliant strategist. The law is squarely on your side. Furthermore, the statute of limitations on this kind of fiduciary breach is long. You are not only the current rightful owner, but your aunt's tenure as property manager since your 18th birthday constitutes a massive, and I mean massive, case of unjust enrichment." "Unjust enrichment," I repeated, tasting the words. "Precisely," Mr. Sterling confirmed. "She has a fiduciary duty to you. She violated it. Every penny of profit, every dollar of rent she used for personal gain over the past 17 years. That money belongs to the trust, which belongs to you. In fact," he steepled his fingers, leaning forward, "you are not merely her landlord, you are now essentially her creditor." The irony was a delicious poison in my throat. Vivienne, the woman who had used my honest, simple life as an example of failure, was now legally deep in debt to me. "What's the first step?" I asked, my voice calm, the librarian's focus returning. The trembling was gone, replaced by resolve, hard as steel. "We send a letter, not an email, not a phone call, a formal, certified letter of notification. It must be cold, legal, and utterly devoid of emotion. It will inform her, in no uncertain terms, that you are exercising your full rights as the legal beneficiary of the trust, effective immediately, And then we demand an accounting, every receipt, every bank statement, every tenant payment she has ever handled. We demand full restitution for the 17 years of misappropriated funds. And the eviction notice she sent me? Mr. Sterling permitted himself the smallest, most predatory smile. We use it against her. We respond to her lawyer's eviction notice with one of our own, except hers was a request. Yours will be a demand. We inform her that due to gross mismanagement and breach of trust, her status as leaseholder of the penthouse is terminated. She has 30 days to vacate. I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of the moment. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't the frantic rhythm of the victim. It was the slow, deliberate beat of the predator. 30 days! I like that symmetry! The stakes are high, Miss Lawton, Mr. Sterling warned, his smile vanishing. Vivienne will fight. She has the best, most expensive corporate lawyers money can buy, and they will try to bury us in motions. Are you prepared for war? I looked at the old biscuit tin, thinking of Vivienne's perfectly coiffed hair, her contemptuous laughter, her claim that my life was pedestrian. I thought of my grandfather, hiding this treasure map to justice. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, I said, picking up the trust agreement again, my eyes scanning the decisive final words. When does the letter go out? By the end of the day, Miss Lawton. It will be on her desk tomorrow morning. Good, I said, standing up. The victim, the mere librarian, was gone. In her place stood the owner, the creditor, the woman with the legal right to take back everything. Let's watch the Queen's penthouse lease expire. I walked out of that office, not as Cora Lawton, the disappointed niece, but as Cora Lawton, the rightful owner of an empire, ready to reclaim what was mine, one devastating legal document at a time. The real eviction notice was on its way. The silence from Aunt Vivienne's camp was louder than any scream. Mr. Sterling's letter, the one that spelled out her 17 years of fraud in cold, legal paragraphs, was delivered by messenger at 9 a.m. sharp. I waited all day in my apartment in my building, expecting the phone to melt from her fury. Nothing. The quiet was tactical, I knew. She wasn't panicking, she was calculating. Vivienne Lawton didn't react, she counterattacked. She's bringing in the big guns, Cora, Gus predicted that evening, watching me pack a duplicate set of the trust documents into a fireproof safe. The silence means she's on the phone with 3 different law firms, probably offering them the entire building as a retainer. Let her, I replied, the fear of her power completely gone, replaced by a grim, focused energy. She's fighting with money that belongs to me. She's using my resources to plot my downfall. It's a beautifully ironic problem, isn't it? Mr. Sterling called me at 7 a.m. the next morning. His voice was sharper than usual. Miss Lawton, they've responded. Not with a denial, which is telling, but with a threat. Her lawyer, a man named Preston Hayes, notorious for his scorched earth tactics, sent a motion to the court questioning the trust's validity due to its age and claiming undue influence by your grandfather. My breath hitched. Undue influence? That's absurd. Grandpa was protecting the assets, not manipulating anyone. Legally, it's a standard delay tactic. They're trying to buy time to dig up some loophole, any loophole. And they filed a simultaneous motion to gag us, to prevent us from contacting any of the tenants or disclosing the trust details to the media. They want to keep this quiet. She wants to keep me silenced, I spat out. She wants the power of her name to trump the power of the law. We can't let her isolate me, Mr. Sterling. The tenants, they're our witnesses, our proof of her mismanagement. The truth was a heavy cloak. Vivienne didn't just hide the trust. She ran the building like a slumlord in a silk suit. She raised rents arbitrarily, ignored repair requests for years, and evicted anyone she deemed undesirable without cause. These were the people she called the Grand-Laughton community, and they all despised her. We can't break the gag order, Mr. Sterling warned. That's a contempt charge. But the trust gives the owner the immediate right to inspect the building's financial records. And since the trust explicitly named you as the owner upon your 18th birthday, we can argue you need to interview the tenants to gauge the extent of the fiduciary breach. Interview them, I mused, a plan beginning to form. I don't need to tell them I'm the owner yet. I just need to tell them I'm the new owner's representative, here to investigate Vivienne's alleged mismanagement for the upcoming lawsuit. It was a half-truth, but a perfectly legal one. That afternoon, I put on my most professional blazer, the one that screamed serious and capable, not mere librarian, and went from door to door in my building. I started with Mrs. Petrov, a sweet but tough elderly woman on the second floor. I knocked. She opened the door. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. You're one of Vivienne's people, aren't you? She sent you about the leaking faucet she hasn't fixed in 6 months. No, Mrs. Petrov. My name is Grand-Laughton. I represent the new stakeholders who are concerned about the building's current administration, specifically Ms. Vivienne Laughton's financial ethics and her treatment of long-term tenants. The name Laughton, spoken by someone not Vivienne, made her pause. Oh? And what concern is that to you? It's a matter of significant financial irregularity, I said, keeping the language clinical. We believe Ms. Laughton has been misappropriating funds, money meant for repairs and maintenance. We are building a legal case to hold her accountable. We need your testimony. Has she raised your rent beyond the legal limit? Has she refused repairs? Mrs. Petrov didn't hesitate. Refused? She laughs. The heating has been erratic for 3 winters. I sent her 3 letters about the window in the stairwell that's been boarded up for 2 years. She told me, and I quote, "If you can't afford the discomfort, darling, perhaps you should find a more modest dwelling." And the rent? It jumped 15% last year, and I've lived here for 40 years. I pulled out my notepad. Thank you. This is very helpful. We believe that money was used for personal expenses, perhaps a new yacht. A flicker of genuine spite crossed Mrs. Petrov's face. Well, I certainly saw her wearing a diamond necklace at the governor's ball last month. It was hideous, the size of an egg. I interviewed 5 more tenants that day. The stories were all the same: arbitrary rent hikes, chronic neglect of the infrastructure, open contempt from Vivienne. The narrative of mismanagement was building itself, perfectly supported by evidence. I wasn't just fighting an eviction, I was exposing a pattern of financial abuse that spanned nearly 2 decades. That night, back in my now sanctified apartment, I called Mr. Sterling. I have statements from 6 tenants confirming rent gouging and willful neglect. We have our evidence of fiduciary breach, Mr. Sterling. The money she stole from the trust should have fixed this building. She chose diamonds instead. Excellent work, Miss Laughton. This strengthens our position immensely, he said. Now, we file the motion for full discovery. We won't just ask for her bank statements, we'll demand her personal credit card bills, every yacht payment, every jewelry purchase. We're not just taking back the building, Cora. We're making her pay back the rent. The thought of Vivienne Laughton, the queen of the high society, having her frivolous spending laid bare in a courtroom, was a stunning, satisfying vision. She had called my life pedestrian. Soon, her decadence would be exposed as a crime. The time for being subtle was over, the counter-eviction notice was ready, and it was about to land right on her marble countertop. Tuyet voi, chung ta se tiep tuk voi shuong katre, quoc chien trien tong gia john, chung ne se la tung quong kung tung, Vivienne sudung quen luk vadan tieng, voi jodai bat buk la oiner tu, wach hun mo shoot, dui triven pong don dap, ngoi thun hat, confession, va joy tho I kich tinj, chuang 4, quoc chien trien tong gia jong. The moment Mr. Sterling filed the motion for full financial discovery, the one demanding every receipt, every credit card statement, every wire transfer of Aunt Vivienne's for the last 17 years, the silence ended. The backlash was immediate, violent, and utterly predictable. Vivienne Laughton had been served, and she was not going down quietly. She didn't call me, she called the press. She's counterattacking on the social front, Mr. Sterling warned me during an emergency call. They just issued a press release calling you a disgruntled relative attempting a hostile, fraudulent takeover of a legitimate family business. They're claiming you fabricated the trust document and are trying to extort her. Extort her? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I'm trying to get back the money she stole and the building she denied me. That's not extortion, that's justice. Justice is messy, Cora. Her lawyer, Hayes, is leaking stories to Page 6, calling you the pauper princess, the black sheep who can't hold a job and now wants to live off her hard-working aunt's legacy. They're painting you as a desperate gold digger. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, the pauper princess. It was effective. It hit exactly where she knew it would hurt. My lack of conventional success, my quiet life, my status as a mere librarian. I won't dignify that garbage with a response, I stated, but the words felt hollow. This wasn't just a legal fight. It was a character assassination, a war waged in headlines and whispers. The pressure intensified when she invoked the family meeting. A summons arrived, not from a lawyer, but from the de facto patriarch of the extended Laughton clan. My Uncle Bernard, a man whose entire identity was tied to the family name and its carefully curated image of respectability. The meeting was held in Vivienne's penthouse, 2 days later. Walking into that space felt like stepping onto a set of a ridiculous, hyper-luxurious soap opera. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and judgment. It was all polished marble, museum-quality art, and cold, echoing silence. My cousins, the few Laughtons who hadn't cut ties with Vivienne completely, were there, sipping champagne, the same champagne she probably bought with my rent money. Vivienne was the last to enter. She floated into the room in a perfectly tailored cream suit, looking every inch the martyred aristocrat. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, as if I were a smudge on the pristine glass coffee table. "Thank you all for coming," she purred, her voice dripping with sorrow and theatrical disappointment. "Especially you, Cora. Though your presence here, after the egregious, shameful accusations you filed, is frankly stunning." Uncle Bernard cleared his throat, his face a mask of weary authority. "Cora, we are here to keep this out of the courts. This is about family face. Vivienne has explained the situation. This ancient document you found, it's clearly some sort of outdated, informal planning idea from your grandfather, one he obviously never intended to formalize. You're misinterpreting it. You're tearing the family apart over an antique piece of paper." "Misinterpreting it," I countered, standing my ground. I made sure my voice was calm, clear, and projected exactly the right amount of steely conviction. "Uncle, that antique paper is a notarized, sealed, irrevocable trust. It is the law. Vivienne has been managing my property, committing a fiduciary breach, and defrauding the legal owner for 17 years. That's not an interpretation. That's a crime." Vivienne finally broke her silence, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Enough, Cora. This greed is unbecoming. I am offering you an out. Drop the lawsuit. Sign a waiver dismissing all claims, and I will be generous. I will gift you a nice, small apartment, a condo, somewhere quiet outside of the city. We'll call it a settlement. You will disappear. You will keep the family name clean. This is your chance to stop the inevitable public humiliation." "Humiliation?" I took a step closer, my adrenaline spiking. My voice dropped to a level that forced everyone to lean in. "Vivienne, I don't want your condo, and I don't want your generosity. I want what is legally mine. And unlike you, I will not trade my integrity for a quiet life." "This is not about integrity, Cora. It's about stability. It's about not letting the press feast on the Laughton name," Bernard interjected, his face flushing with frustration. "Just take the deal and end this." "You want to talk about the press feasting?" I challenged, looking directly at Vivienne. "Tell them the truth. Tell them you hid a trust and illegally pocketed the income for nearly 2 decades. Tell them about the tenants you evicted and the repairs you neglected while you were buying diamond eggs. Tell them I'm the landlord and you're the one who's getting served." My outburst hung in the air, a shocking violation of their polished decorum. Vivienne's composure finally fractured. Her perfect mouth tightened into a thin, venomous line. "You stubborn, thankless little fool," she hissed, abandoning her composure entirely. "You want war? You'll have it. You think that small-time lawyer of yours can stand up to Preston Hayes and my team? You will be crushed, Cora. You will lose your pathetic little rent-controlled apartment, and you will have to pay my legal fees. You will end up with nothing." I let the threat hang there. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. A real, genuine, cold smile, because I knew something she didn't. She was arguing with me over a meager $20,000 settlement while I was preparing to take back a $50 million building and demand restitution for 17 years of theft. "I'm prepared to take that risk, Vivienne," I said, turning to leave. "I'm prepared to let the public judge who the real thief is. Tell Preston Hayes to prepare his accounting because the clock on your 30-day notice just started ticking down to 0. As I walked out, I didn't feel alone. I had the tenants' stories, Mr. Sterling's bulldog legal strategy, and the solid, undeniable truth hidden in that brittle piece of paper. The war was officially public, and for the first time, I felt the glorious, terrifying weight of having the upper hand. Tuyet voi, chung tasit yeptuk voi shuang sink, kuok joy, jiao tai tavalen tich bien. Chung nai sila, kao trao, climax, jaungok, quen luk tuyet joy, pawn queen, voi jodai bat bokla 802, hoak hon mot chut, dui trivan bong don dap, ngoi thun hat confession, va joy thoai kich ting. Chuang 5, quok joy, jiao tai ta valen tik bien. The weeks leading up to the preliminary injunction hearing were a blur of depositions, legal motions, and relentless, humiliating press coverage, engineered by Vivienne's team. Every society blogger, every gossip column had a field day with the pauper princess versus the property queen. I was tired, yes, but the exhaustion was overridden by a fierce, driving clarity. Every time I saw her perfectly photoshopped face in a magazine, I just held the image of the Irrevocable Trust, the document that was about to turn her world into rubble. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side, Vivienne Lawton, draped in a conservative but devastatingly expensive black dress, flanked by Preston Hayes and two junior lawyers who looked like they'd just stepped off a yacht. They exuded a smug confidence that spoke volumes. Law is expensive and we are rich. On my side, Mr. Sterling and me, no entourage, just a stack of yellowed documents and the weight of undeniable truth. I sat at the table, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. But beneath the anxiety, there was a core of absolute calm. I knew I had the law, and she had only her carefully constructed lies. Preston Hayes opened the argument for Vivienne, his voice smooth and contemptuous. He dismissed the trust as an outdated, unenforceable historical curiosity, claiming Cora was simply trying to extort a settlement from a generous relative. He even brought up the tenant statements, trying to spin them. Your Honor, Miss Lawton's so-called evidence of mismanagement is nothing more than hearsay collected by a disgruntled niece attempting to paint my client, a respected and highly successful real estate magnate, as a slumlord. This is a malicious, unfounded attack on Mrs. Lawton's reputation and financial well-being, Hayes declared, pounding his fist lightly on the defense table. It was a performance worthy of Broadway. But then Mr. Sterling rose. He didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke with the quiet authority of a man who knew the precise location of the bomb. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling began, Mr. Hayes has focused entirely on reputation, but this court deals in documents and law. I will cut to the chase. The defense claims the trust is unenforceable. We will now submit Exhibit A, the original sealed trust document, signed 50 years ago and never legally superseded. It states unequivocally that the Grand-Laughton building transferred ownership to the beneficiary, Miss Cora Lawton, on her 18th birthday. That occurred 17 years ago. The document was handed to the clerk, then passed up to the judge. I watched the judge's face as he read the key passages. His eyebrows slowly rose. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Vivienne leaned forward, whispering furiously to Hayes, her composure finally beginning to crack. Mr. Sterling continued, turning his attention to the core issue, the fiduciary breach. Your Honor, since Miss Lawton has been the owner for 17 years, all rental income collected by Mrs. Vivienne Lawton during that time belonged to the trust. The defense claims my client is extorting Mrs. Lawton. We claim Mrs. Lawton has been committing grand theft and financial abuse. Hayes jumped up. Objection, characterization. Sustained, the judge ruled flatly. Stick to the evidence, counsel. Of course, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling conceded smoothly. We will now submit Exhibits B through G, the detailed bank statements and credit card expenditures obtained under the court's discovery order. These documents prove that during the time Mrs. Lawton was legally obligated to manage the building for the trust, she systematically diverted millions of dollars from the building's operating accounts into personal accounts. We have records of the purchase of a 40-foot yacht, a $250,000 diamond pendant, the very one described by a long-term tenant, and payments for a penthouse renovation that the trust never approved. He paused, letting the weight of the numbers sink in. In short, Mrs. Lawton failed to repair the heating and plumbing for tenants, while simultaneously using those repair funds to finance her luxury lifestyle. She was not a diligent property manager. She was a thief. Vivienne's face went white. She looked like a marble statue that had just realized it was melting. Hayes tried to argue procedural errors, to muddy the waters, but the damage was done. The numbers don't lie. The judge silenced the courtroom with a sharp strike of the gavel. He looked down at Vivienne, his expression stern. Mrs. Lawton, the judge stated, his voice echoing the finality of the law. The court finds the Irrevocable Trust Agreement to be valid, binding, and clearly established by the original owner. The evidence presented by Miss Lawton, including the misappropriation of funds for personal luxury while failing to maintain the property, constitutes a severe breach of fiduciary duty. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the climax. Therefore, the judge continued, the court rules that Miss Cora Lawton is the rightful and legal owner of the Grand-Laughton building, effective immediately. Furthermore, Due to the magnitude of the financial breach, the court grants Miss Laughton immediate possession of the property and issues a writ of execution and ejectment against Mrs. Vivienne Laughton for the immediate seizure of the top-floor penthouse to offset the damages and restitution owed to the trust. Mrs. Laughton must vacate the premises within 48 hours. 48 hours? Vivienne let out a small, strangled gasp. Hayes looked utterly defeated, the color draining from his expensive suit. I didn't look at them. I just looked at the judge, feeling the tremor of power thrumming through my body. The eviction notice had been reversed and amplified 100-fold. The woman who tried to kick the mere librarian out of her humble apartment was now being tossed out of her $1 million penthouse by the very librarian she scorned. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. I looked across the table at Vivienne, who was now weeping, her perfect makeup ruined by the sheer shock of absolute defeat. "Vivienne," I said, my voice low but carrying across the stunned silence of the courtroom. I used her name not as a niece, but as the owner. "I suggest you start packing and don't touch the silverware. It belongs to the building." The battle was over. The pawn had just become the queen, and her first royal decree was eviction. "Tuyet voi! Chung ta setep tuk voi, chuang 6. Lun jiao jiao juk van goin hamoi, chung nai sila han jong giam dan, falling action, va jiai quiet, resolution, kung ko chu jeva chua loi keo, goi han jong, sitia, voi jo daibad buok la okner tu, hoak hon mo chut, duidrivan fong don dap, goi thun hat, confession, va joi thoai kichtin, chuang 6, lun jiao jiao juk van goi namoi. The aftermath was silent, devastating, and swift. 48 hours. That was all the time the queen of property, Vivienne Laughton, had to clear out her $4 million penthouse. The sight of the moving trucks, the same ones she had intended to use on my meager belongings, now pulling away with her priceless art and designer furniture, was a sight I'll never forget. She didn't look at me, not once. She just looked straight ahead, her face a rigid mask of humiliation as the media cameras, already tipped off, flashed mercilessly. The scandal wasn't just in the papers, it was the lead story on every major network. The queen had fallen, and her greed was the anchor that dragged her down. The family, the ones who had sided with her stability, melted away. Uncle Bernard called once, not to apologize, but to ask if he could buy the penthouse at a family discount. I told him the trust was not in the business of offering discounts to enablers. The first thing I did after the court victory was walk through every floor of the Grand-Laughton, not as the evicted niece, but as the owner. I went straight to Mrs. Petroff. I found her struggling with a leaky pipe under her sink. "Mrs. Petroff," I said, kneeling down beside her, not in a suit but in jeans. "Stop. You don't have to do that anymore." She looked up, startled. "Cora, what are you doing here? Did she send you to finally fix the pipe?" "I fixed more than the pipe, ma'am," I replied, handing her a new, formal document. "This is a notice. Effective immediately, your rent is reduced to the legal, pre-Vivienne controlled rate. And this," I handed her a second document, "is a work order. We are starting a full building restoration next week, beginning with the boiler, your window, and every single deferred maintenance issue. I'm giving you a number for the new superintendent, not a management company, a human being who actually lives here, on the first floor." Mrs. Petroff's eyes welled up, not with tears of sorrow, but tears of sudden, overwhelming relief. You're not selling the building?" "No," I said, standing up. "This building was my grandfather's home, meant to be a haven, not a high-end ATM. I'm not selling it to turn a profit. I'm keeping it to make it a community. That's what he wanted." The next few months were a blur of paperwork, construction dust, and ethical leadership. I used the initial settlement from the seized penthouse assets to fund the repairs. I met with the tenants, not as a landlord, but as a peer, asking what they truly needed. We lowered rents across the board to rates that were fair and sustainable. The Grand-Laughton stopped being a luxury brand and became simply a good home. And the penthouse. The irony of moving my few boxes of books and my worn velvet armchair into that sprawling empty space was not lost on me. But I didn't keep it as a monument to luxury. I kept the living room as a beautiful, sunlit space, but I cleared out the rest. I turned 2 of the giant, unused bedrooms into studios, one for Gus to teach jazz history to local kids, and one for a rotating residency for struggling artists and writers. The penthouse, once the symbol of Vivienne's selfish consumption, became the heart of the building's new identity, a place of creation and community. I stood on the balcony one evening, looking out over the twinkling cold lights of the city. I was the owner, I had the power, and I hadn't used it for revenge, only for restitution. Vivienne lost everything because she valued property over people. I won because I chose the opposite. This story isn't just about a hidden document or a legal victory. It's about what you do when you suddenly get the power you never asked for. It's about taking a legacy of greed and twisting it into a future of decency. Vivienne taught me that true wealth isn't measured by the height of your penthouse, but by the depth of your integrity. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth more than the Grand-Laughton itself. And this is where your part in the story truly begins. If this journey, this fight for fairness against the backdrop of unimaginable greed, resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your simple, honest life was being undervalued by the system or by someone with more power, then you already understand the core of this whole mess. Hit that like button right now if you agree that integrity always beats extravagance. Leave a comment below and tell me, what is the most unethical thing you've ever seen a landlord or a person in power do? Your stories prove that the fight for justice is never solitary. And most importantly, to keep this entire confessional series, the real stories of what happened after the eviction, the truth about the missing funds, and what happened to Vivienne, alive and reaching those who need to hear it most, please subscribe to the channel. It's the only way to ensure the Queen's fall continues to inspire change. Thank you for listening to my confession. The house is fixed, the money is back, and the right person is finally signing the checks. The Grand-Laughton is home again.